The bench press on the Bowflex is very different from the normal bench press you'd see somebody do in a gym. Usually a bench press in a gym is done with a barbell and works very specific muscles. For example, typically with the bench press we expect to work everything on the front part of the shoulder. Front deltoids, part of the middle deltoids, and most notably the pectoralis major. In fact, many people just call it a chest exercise, but there's a lot more than that working. Now, whether or not you use your triceps on this exercise, we're going to be very different because we have many options with the Bowflex, such as in pulley positions, and we'll talk about that when we get there. First thing you're going to notice is Josh is just sitting on the seat facing forward. The seat height is the first thing you've got to be concerned about because that's going to determine the plane or path that you can push through. Now, take a look. You can see we set the seat just right so that Josh's shoulders were about the same height as this main crossbar back here. Now, he's all ready to go. We've got actually the pulleys in the first position, the narrowest position. And I'm even going to suggest that maybe if you've never done this exercise before, this is a great place to start. This actually mimics the position that we had on the oldest version of the Bowflex, the old Power Pro. Now, next, grabbing the handles. And here's where you need to start from the very beginning, taking care of how you do things. So watch how Josh does this. He kind of leans forward and reaches back from underneath, and then just kind of curls the handle to his shoulder. Now that's a lot better than trying to reach back over the top like this. I would not advise that. Replay this if you have to, but watch how Josh did that. Then he just brought his arms out to the side, not all the way up to shoulder height. See, he's just right there, just a little bit below shoulder height. That's just perfect. And his elbows are bent to about 90 degrees. Now, watch very carefully. Before you start moving, you need to position your body in just the right place. Make sure your head is back, don't throw your chin forward, and think about lifting your rib cage and kind of pinching those shoulder blades back and together. And if you can, work on keeping that trunk and rib cage position throughout the entire movement of each and every repetition. Now watch as he maintains that. He's going to slowly bring his arms together and straighten them towards the front. Now one big key here, see if you can do that again, Josh, and we're going to show people how the cable stays right near his arm the whole time. That shows that he's moving in the right plane, and you've got a little bit of leeway. You'll notice Josh could come up just a tiny bit and see the cable still against him. It's pretty close, and he could come down just a little bit. So he's got some opportunity for change there, and now it's kind of digging into him a little bit. So there's a few inches that he could come out, but pretty much from a side view, it's going to look like Josh's arms are staying perpendicular to or 90 degrees to his trunk, okay? Now, every time he goes back to the starting position, he lets the elbows bend. Watch slowly. See the elbows bend as he comes back, and he stops where his arms are just about even with the bench right here. They're not really going behind the bench with his elbow. That's a key component to being safe. And throughout each and every repetition, as he moves towards the center, he keeps everything tight and everything controlled. He doesn't throw anything. He doesn't try to jerk it or go fast. And he keeps that rib cage up the entire time. Now you want to try something different for me here?
Yep.
Watch this. We'll move out to the second pulley position, kind of the next to the narrowest, and then Josh is reaching from underneath again, curling up, elbows out to the side, and he'll do the press again, but this time the cable is addressing his arm at a slightly different position, and it's closer to the elbow when he's out at the widest or starting point. So the first two narrowest settings here are pretty much going to involve, along with these anterior shoulder muscles and pecs, your tricep. Now watch this next one. I'm going to go ahead and take you to the extreme, the widest position, and this will be much more difficult. You may not be able to use the same resistance that you chose for the narrow settings that you can for the wide settings. This is a little tougher because, watch carefully, as Josh comes back, this cable is almost further out than his elbows are. It's outside of his elbows. He's actually using different muscles, not so much tricep this time, but actually more of these elbow flexors because the cable's trying to pull his arms apart or wider. And you'll notice, watch when he gets towards the center. This cable's pulling outward on him almost like a cable crossover would if he was doing a pressing type motion in the middle of a cable crossover in a traditional gym setting. Feels different, right?
Oh yeah.
And notice how hard he's working to keep that chest up. Can we do one more? Watch what happens when Josh does this, and let everything collapse and just throw your shoulders forward. See, it's just not as tight. There's not as much going on. When he lifts that rib cage and keeps that up the whole time, it changes things dramatically. So, before you go challenge yourself with a bunch of weight and start worrying about the numbers on the ends of the rods, put a little bit on there and practice these things we discussed, and you'll get a lot more out of it. The chest fly on the Bowflex has several options that we're going to talk about that will actually make it one option like a little bit like a dumbbell fly that you've done in a gym maybe, and the other option will be a little bit like a cable crossover type of fly that you also might have seen in a gym. But first things first, the chest fly does work not only just the pecs, but everything on the front part of the shoulder, some deltoids and that kind of thing, and there's actually going to be some of these elbow flexors involved in keeping the arm in a relatively static, not necessarily straight, but static, unmoving position at the elbow. So we set the seat for Josh for this exercise is just right so that his shoulder is just about even with the crossbar. So check your seat position a couple times, maybe have a mirror set up and you can kind of tell where you are here. That's the first critical thing. Next, be very careful with how you grab the handle. Go ahead and show him, Josh, kind of reach underneath there and watch how he kind of bends his elbow and brings it right to his shoulder. That is by far the safest way. Don't try to reach back over or out and stuff like that. This is a really good way to do it. And then he's just going to bring his arms out to the side. And like I said, he's keeping a little bit of a bend in his elbow. And you can even vary that. Sometimes a little more of a bend, sometimes a little straighter. That looks pretty good right there. And I've got the pulley set in the narrowest setting. And this is going to be the best place for beginners to start, primarily for getting used to the exercise, because this will actually make the resistance a little less dramatic for you having the pulley in this position. So watch as he positions his body, he keeps that rib cage out and up and really kind of keeps his shoulder blades back the whole time. And then he slowly brings his arms to the front. Now, you may have heard this cue if you've been around gyms long enough where people talk about act like you're reaching around a tree. Have you ever heard that? Yeah. Act like you're going to hug a tree. And I would really advise against that, because usually when people do that, when they come around to reach around the tree, yeah, they drop everything. They drop their rib cage, they drop their posture. So I'm going to suggest you don't think about the hugging thing, but think about the shoulders back and simply bringing those arms towards the center with this being prominent, sticking up your rib cage. Males or females, it doesn't matter. If you want to involve these muscles right here the most, the chest muscles, keep that rib cage up. And you can play with it a little bit and you'll see what I mean. But now let's take a look as we come back. Notice that go ahead and go towards the front, Josh. The pulley just about lines up through Josh's shoulder here and makes a really easy position at the end. Like I said, a nice place to learn the movement. As you get better at it, or if you just want a difference, you know what you can do is move the pulley out. You can try the other settings, but just for an extreme example right now with Josh, I'm going to show you the widest setting that I mentioned before was a little bit like the cable crossover type of fly in the gym. Now watch as he comes together. The cable is not lined up through his shoulder this time. It's still pulling out to the side. And there's a dramatic difference in how hard this is or how difficult this is, because he's having to work, even up here, he's having to work to keep the weight or resistance from pulling him out. So it's much more difficult through the entire range of motion. How's it feel?
Definitely
pretty
harder.
Good? Yeah. Harder. And notice this is just a standard plane of motion, meaning he's not declined or inclined. His arms are just about 90 degrees to his torso. So he's just moving straight in front of his chest the whole time. Perfect. Let's take a look at the decline press or decline chest press. Now this time, the seat is a little bit lower. And notice for Josh, we've actually got it on the lowest setting. And for Josh, that ends up being where his shoulders are about the same height as the pulley when they're not being used, when they're just hanging here. And that's going to be important because it's a new plane or path of motion that's going to angle downward. So the pulley needs to be, in essence, above his shoulder as much as we can get it. So notice how he reaches back to grab, again reaching behind and just bringing a bent arm and curling it right in towards his shoulder, and then elbows out to the side. Now watch. Start before you even move, start by getting the chest up high, pinching the shoulders nice and tight back together. And a lot of times people don't think about this enough, or they think, oh, I'm good enough. Really, go ahead and try to get them back there and work on that and get that rib cage up and out. Now, we're going to angle downward. We're going to drive the arms together, straightening the elbows and meeting the hands in the center or coming close to it. And you'll notice I have got the pulleys in the narrow position. Again, I think this is a great place to start, especially learning the exercise. It makes it a little bit like a dumbbell press. You know, if you use dumbbells in the gym, when you get to where the dumbbells are over you, they're kind of balanced through your shoulder. They're not very difficult in that position. And this is mimicked by the pulley position here. And that looks perfect. Now, if you notice from the side, the angle at which Josh is pushing, he's probably a foot lower maybe from his original chest press that we did before, if you reviewed that. Now, take a look what happens. We can make this a little bit different. If I move this outward, I'll go ahead and just move it out just a little bit, maybe to the third hole from the narrowest or the next to the widest. Same path of motion, but we've changed things. From this position, you can see that when Josh goes to the end, with arms near straight, the cable is not lined up through his shoulder anymore or resting on his shoulder. It's got some separation there, and that makes it harder at this position. If we went out to the widest position again, even all the way out here, it would be even tougher. So you may have to adjust the weight. If you did a really challenging set with the pulleys in narrow, and then you say, hey, for the next set I'm going to go wider, you might have to change things a little bit. Notice every time, one key component to using the Bowflex, every time Josh moves through the path of motion, that cable stays lined up through his arm. Watch what would happen. If he was too high, he would know it right off the bat because there's some distance between his arm and the cable. So that's what helps him to know that he's moving the right direction. And then all he has to do, if he's feeling it in his chest and keeping it up, he's going to really be able to tell versus let it drop again. Let's see. If he lets that chest drop, yep, it's just not going to provide the same effect to him as if he really tries to keep his posture the whole time. The incline press or incline chest press works not only predominantly the top part of your pectoralis major, but a whole lot of the front part of your shoulder, and depending on what we do with the pulleys, it's going to involve different parts of your elbow muscles, either your tricep or your bicep. So the first thing, you're going to adjust the seat pretty high, probably the highest of anything you've done so far. Notice we've got Amy up here, way up in the air, because we're going to be pushing at an upward angle. And so by the time we create a scenario where the cable stays against her arm and she's moving at an upward angle, she needs to be virtually 3 or 4 inches, maybe 5 or 6 inches higher than the actual pulleys are in the starting position. So try different seat positions before you actually do the movement and just see what it looks like, maybe in a mirror, maybe a mirror from the side. You can tell how high you're pushing. Now the next thing is watch how you grab the handle. So Amy reaches from underneath, kind of bends her elbow so it doesn't put a lot of stress on her shoulder. And then when she curls them towards her shoulders and then elbows out to the side. Now, watch the angle she presses at. She's going to bring the shoulders back, yep, rib cage up, and she's pushing upward, kind of up even with the top of her head. Now, when we were doing a regular chest press before, it would have been down lower like this. You can see the slight difference, and there is a slight difference not only in terms of what muscles are participating, not so much that they're different, but different aspects of the same ones, and it's a little bit different for the wear on your shoulders. Keep it going there, a couple more. Now this is the narrow setting, and notice that it's falling, the cable is falling right next to her shoulder when she's at the top. Slow down a little bit. There you go. So see how it's balanced right there? It's much easier right there. And when she comes down, it falls, the cable is rubbing on her arm between her elbow and her shoulder. When we move this wider, let's just go back and I'm going to change it for a second. When we go wider, which is a great option for you. You may want to change resistance. She's already got a pretty easy resistance for her. But watch the difference. When she goes up to the top, the cable is a long way from her shoulder now. It's a little bit harder, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tougher to get to the center because this cable, by not balancing through her shoulder, is a little bit tougher. And it's also a little bit different on the elbow because it's right even with the elbow and a little bit outside of the elbow. It might even bring in some of the elbow flexors instead of the triceps. So a little bit different thing. It's not a bad substitute. You can even change between the various chest presses that we've discussed just for not only variety, but just to have an entirely different stress on your shoulders so you're not always getting the same old thing in there. Make sure every time, though, that you're really slow, really consistent with your path of motion, never trying to throw it, never trying to just launch it really fast, and keep this posture we've talked about, chest up and shoulders a little bit back. The decline chest fly and also the decline chest press we mentioned earlier are not what they seem to be. In other words, many times in the gym people say, oh, this works your lower pec, when in fact the decline plane of motion may be the best at working your entire pec. Well, let's take a look. We've got Amy's seat pretty low here so that the pulley is relatively high compared to her shoulder. This is going to allow her to move through that lower plane. So go ahead and grab out there, and we've got that one on the third hole, and put this one on the third hole from the center. And notice how she bent her arms and then brought the weights into the center. Oh yeah, there you go. Now, watch the path of motion. Watch where the cable is. Chest up, shoulders back, and squeeze towards the center a little bit low, but her arms are lined up right with the cable, creating that perfect declined plane of motion. And let's show them what happens if it's too high. What's it going to look like if you came out here? See how that cable would be way up above her arm here? So when she comes down, right there, it's lined up right with her arm. And that looks great. So she's keeping her chest up, shoulders back, watching how far back she comes with her arms at the end so they don't try to go behind the bench. Very important safety tip. Take it nice and slow. There you go. We've got Josh set for the inclined fly. Now the seat's a little bit higher than normal. In fact, I think we've got it just about all the way up here and maybe one notch from the top. And that's going to allow him to move upwards at an angle that we call an incline in the gym. And it's going to work, again, not only his chest, but a bunch of muscle in the front of his shoulder. And the key here, as always, is be careful how you grab the handles. Reach back slowly, bend your arm slowly, and then get that chest up, shoulders back. Now watch from the side, you can see when he comes up, that cable keeps lined up with his arms. He could even go, let's see what happens if you go just a little bit higher or a little bit lower. A little bit higher, it's not lined up with his arm as much anymore. So we might actually have him go, that was a little bit too high of an incline. There you go, but it's still a lot higher than where he was when he was doing that regular chest fly. Notice he keeps his arm at about the same position. It's not all the way straight. It's not bent very much. He could bend it a little more if he chose to. That's just a personal preference thing. But he's keeping all these positions. And the one final thing I want to tell you, there's a lot of myths in the gym about flies, like one kind of fly works your inner chest and one kind of fly works your outer chest. And sorry, folks, none of that stuff is even possible. So you can choose your pulley width here based on whether you like the dumbbell fly feeling, which would be the closer feeling, or more of a cable crossover type of fly, which would be the outer setting. But either way, they're both working the same parts across the top of your pec and shoulder. This is called a rear delt row, but there's really a lot more going on than that. First of all, remove the seat. You're not going to need it. And we're going to start with either the pulleys in the narrowest setting, or you might try it in the next to the narrowest, probably to position 2, I guess we could call it. And then when you grab the handles, notice how Josh has got them crossed here. So with his left hand, he grabbed the right handle and vice versa. And now when he stands up, here's what we suggested. Maybe he do kind of a 1 foot in front of the other kind of stance, not with his feet lined up, with a little bit of width to him so he's stable front to back and stable side to side. And then what he really needs to do is angle his torso so he's pretty much perpendicular to the cables. So he's kind of bent forward ever so slightly, but notice he's got a pretty good spinal alignment here. He didn't just go ahead and slouch kind of forward. He's not bent forward like that. We never want that. So he's really got his chest up and everything. He's just kind of bent forward at the hip by sticking his bottom out. Now, what you're going to notice across here is a whole lot of work with all these muscles in the trapezius and rhomboids and all those scapular guys, some rear delts, and even some guys underneath the rear delts, a little bit of the rotator cuff and that kind of stuff. Now watch carefully. He's going to lead with his elbows. His palms are facing the ground, and he leads with the elbows and keeps them almost shoulder height and takes them back as far as he can without just going ahead and leaning his whole body back. Yeah, we don't want that. So now when he comes forward, his torso stays there. It doesn't follow him forward, and he can squeeze him back again. You can see exactly what he's working here. This time as he comes forward, you're going to let your shoulder blades move a little bit. Sometimes you can let your shoulder blades move a little bit as long as you don't slouch. That's an option also. But every time he comes back, he's got those arms almost shoulder height, and that's the key because watch, let's take him down. See what happens? When he went down away from shoulder height, you don't see those rear delts as much anymore, do you? So that's pretty neat right there. A couple more reps and you can watch that perfect form. Nothing else changes. Feeling good?
Oh yeah.
Get the weight just right so you can practice the perfect one first. There you go.